Welcome to the Modeling Lifestyle, where we celebrate how modelers have embraced their modeling and friendships as a lifestyle. We discuss how modeling can become a life passion and lead to lifelong friendships. The goal of the modeling lifestyle is to preserve the modeling and interests of leading modelers and the modeling industry. The modeling lifestyle is sponsored by NGMC, who believes that through bringing hobbyists together with both information and modeling, the hobby will grow stronger with more model builders than ever. NGMC, which started as narrow gauge modeling company, is focused in 1/4 inch scale across hobbies. NGMC is a market leader in 1/4 inch scale with a range of products from over 50 vendors. In 2021, NGMC became the largest reseller of out-of-production model paint in North America with over 9,000 bottles in stock. And now to Jim Kello, MMR, host of the Modeling Lifestyle.
I love the sound of a whistle.
Well, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really do appreciate it. We hope you'll come back often and tell your friends about us. Our show seeks to introduce not only great modelers to you, but modelers who have made modeling a significant part of their lifestyle. We really appreciate you viewing us tonight on our YouTube channel, New Tracks Modeling. Please don't hesitate to ask any questions or make any comments that you may have on the chat function. And as soon as I've found out that you have a question or comment, I'll try to incorporate it into our show and ask our guests what you want to find out. Tonight, I want to introduce you to a fantastic guy, Tom Farrell. Tom is not only a very talented, creative, and artistic modeler, but Tom, he's just a major promoter of our hobby. He's helped so many people and inspired so many modelers to improve their skills and their knowledge of our great hobby. So Tom, thank you so much for being here tonight. Can you tell us a little bit about who Tom Farrell is?
First, I want to thank you, Jim, for featuring me this evening. It's a great honor. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say my whole life centers around model railroading. I mean, I just love the hobby, and I've been in it since 1967, when I was 7 years old. My hometown is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and interesting enough, one of my first memories is of a train. I think I was around 5 years old, and I was in a little town called East Brady, Pennsylvania, north of Pittsburgh, at a family reunion. I was standing in a field with my grandmother, and I distinctly remember a caboose and a brakeman, or a conductor, I'm not sure, red caboose, and waving to the caboose. This was servicing the old Rexnard rubber plant, long since gone. So it's one of my earliest memories. And it wasn't too far after that I got hooked with model railroading, and had my first layout when I was about 8 years old. After that period, from 1967 to 1976, I had a single railroad that I worked on in N scale. And then in 1976, the family moved to Milford, Connecticut. I was 16. I did start a layout up there in Milford, but I didn't get very far. It was all about sports cars and girls at that point. And then I went on later, graduated from high school, and enrolled at Penn State, where I was a poor student, but an excellent athlete. I have 3 varsity letters at Penn State in 2 sports. My father reminds me all the time that he didn't pay for an education, he paid for a sports career. I'm fortunate that I've lived all over the country. I lived in right out of Penn State. I moved to northern New Jersey. From northern New Jersey, I went to Houston, Texas. From Texas, I went to Philadelphia. These are all apartments, so I had no opportunity for model railroading. And from Philly, I went to Southern California. And that house was so small, there was no real room for a railroad at that point either. And then we returned to the East Coast to Philadelphia again. And that's when after 12 years, I picked up my hobby again. And it was N scale at that point. And I built a railroad in the basement and I had a lot of fun with it. And from Philly, we moved to Boston. I had to tear that layout apart. I built another layout, N scale layout in Boston. And that's when I got involved with N-Track, which was, I'm still sort of in the N-Track world once in a while. I have a module or two. And from Boston, we moved to Bloomington, Indiana, where I took my first CEO role. I became the CEO and president of the largest dimensional stone company in the world, the Indiana Limestone Company. We're known for building icons of American architecture like the National Cathedral, the Pentagon, the Empire State Building, 32 of the 50 state capitals. It was a 100-year-old company. I was really honored. I didn't own it, I ran it. And what I found most intriguing about it was its railroad history, which included a narrow gauge line that ran through the plant and in the block yard. We had the largest block yard in the world, 18,000 blocks as big as an SUV. And it used to be a freight yard. I found that fascinating. So I spent a great deal of my time walking the quarry and looking at the old railroad lines. It was just interesting. And that's when I moved to Bloomington is when I switched scales. I've always been a scratch builder, even in N scale, I scratch built. But I just found it so difficult to scratch build with any amount of detail in N scale. Now there's a couple guys that get away with it, but it was just too hard for the kind of work that I wanted to do. So I wanted to move up in scales, and I got into ON30, quite by accident, actually. And I ordered 2 Broadway limited HO locomotives. They were back ordered. And I looked at what else they had, and I saw the ON30. I said, let me try this. And that's how I got into ON30. And all my homes, we can switch. Maybe we can go to a couple slides here. That was my house that I grew up in Pittsburgh. And if you see the back porch there, underneath the porch is a shed. And that was my first railroad from 1967 at 7 years old to 1976, where I was 16. That was unheated. That shows you my dedication to the hobby. It was absolutely freezing in the wintertime. And in the summer, it was a sweat box, but it didn't deter me. I had approximately a 10-foot by 10-foot N scale layout in that. It was a lot of fun, and that's where I honed my skills. And I still have my very first scratch build, which I should have featured a photograph, but it's not really too bad for an 8-year-old, I have to tell you. So I go to the next slide. This was the chest beating exercise in Bloomington to show everybody that I was a CEO. I sold this house last July. We were in this home for 16 years. This was the home of the Rustic Buff and Old Gothic Railroad. My ON30 railroad's named after the 2 poorest grades of Indiana limestone. Rustic Buff and Old Gothic are near scrap materials. That was my little private joke. Now I sold this house, and I'll just go brief on this, but in February of last year, I was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. And I thought it would be a good idea to get rid of this palace and half of these cars and just downsize so I wouldn't leave my wife with so much burden with such a large home and all these cars. As a side note, I'm in complete remission and I have no evidence of the disease, and I wish I hadn't sold the house, but that's another story. I sold my Porsche, I sold my Cadillac, have my pickup truck and my wife's car. So we successfully downsized. The nice thing is we're now in a home. We purchased a new home in March of this year, and we moved in May. And it has actually a larger layout room than this house. So, and that's underway right now. So I'll take a pause here and let Jim throw something out.
Let me ask you this, of all the hobbies that you could have gone to, what really drew you to model railroading?
I always thought of myself as although I've had 3 CEO roles, I've always thought of myself as an artist. And I wanted to take art in school at college. And my father said, the rich people send their kids to school to get an education. The middle class send them to school so they can get educated, get a job. He says, if you want to do art, you do that on your own. But so I've always been a frustrated artist. And I think one outlet for my artistic bent is model railroading. I think of it as in terms of almost like a sculpture, and the photography and the modeling. I frame everything up. If you've seen my work on Facebook, I carefully compose the photographs, accent the modeling, and high level of detail. It's an outlet. It's like a sculpture to me.
Well, let's stop it right now and take a look at a few of your models, and maybe you can talk to us about them a little bit. What are we seeing here?
This is the town of Rustic Buff, on the old Rustic Buff and Old Gothic Railroad. All my structures on the railroad are scratch built. Some of these take as short as 2 to 3 weeks. Some take 3 months to make. They're one of the ways I model. I do everything. I don't really have too many prototypical structures. I typically search Google for ideas. For this depot, for example, I found an example of this in an old magazine, and somebody modeled it in HO, and I basically took the concept and made this station. This one took quite some time. There's a lot of different materials on this. There's a lot of different interesting colors and feathering, and I really get excited over the detail. And this combines a styrene roof and basswood and cedar shakes and just all kinds of things. It's an interesting model, and and the hotel behind it is a railroad hotel. It's I chose the same windows because I wanted to have the same sort of genre, and you're looking at a Broadway Limited. This is the first 2 locomotives I purchased for ON30. These things don't run worth a damn. They're photo queens. They don't run anymore, but I put a whaleback tender on this and detailed and weathered this to make it unique. So what you're seeing here are 2 scratch-built buildings and a very heavily kit-bashed Broadway Limited locomotive.
Tom, let me ask you a question. Do you scratch build your track too, or is that just regular track? Or
I detail my track. My track is a combination. It's 90% of it's Pico, and there's some mic on this particular, where the hotel starts is where the micro engineering starts. I like the look of the micro engineering track, but I like the durability of the Pico. So this is the ongoing debate in Facebook, which track to use. Or on my new layout, I debated hand laying the track, but I just said I'm going to use Pico. It's very durable. I hand paint all those ties. My wife thinks I'm insane. I treat the track like a Model 2. So I rust the rails with multiple colors of rust. I paint the ties individually with different colors and washes. And in my opinion, it comes off presentable. It's,
That's why I ask about it. I mean, it looks gorgeous from the photos that I'm looking at. I just it really is a piece of art.
And the ballast, I also I dye the ballast too. So I never use anything right out of the box, if you will. This is a nice little structure. It's approximately 8 to 9 inches in length. Gleason's Mechanical Test Company. I name most of my buildings after my friends. And he and I both worked at a company called Instron, and this is sort of a nod to that. And I had a visitor. I haven't had too many visitors come see my layout because I live in Bloomington, Indiana, sort of off the beaten path. But I had a fella come visit, and he said, all your people are either drunk or hobos on your entire layout. I said, yeah. I said, that's my other little joke. Everybody's half in the bag or a hobo. And Gleason's Mechanical Test Company is no exception. Two guys are one guy's drunk, another guy's drinking. Little joke.
Fantastic.
Yeah. I mentioned that I'm a somewhat of an artist. These are two of my paintings. These are acrylic. The painting on the left is one of the few paintings I've ever given away. I had a friend of mine whose son was in Cuba, and he ranted and raved about this photograph that he had. And I said, why don't you let me see this photograph you keep talking about? And then I knocked this painting out in a week's time. I try to do one painting a year. The Christmas week, I try to knock one out. And I gave him this painting, and it's a little outside of my normal style. My normal style is like the one on the right. It's an impressionist look. That's Mission San Juan Capistrano. And these are probably two of my better paintings, but I do one a year. I just enjoy it. And I hope you like them too. Yeah.
Well, you ought to be very proud of them.
This is probably my favorite shot. It's well composed, reminds me of Judy's composition. It highlights all the detail that I put into my railroad. Everything starts out with just placing the structure and then placing another structure. And then I keep doing layer after layer of detail. So I added the road, for example, the brick road, then the concrete sidewalks, then the bushes, and then the wood crossing. And then I built handmade that crossing. And you just keep adding detail after detail after detail, and you build a scene. And it gets quite convincing with the photographs in the background are right off the internet. I search and find them. They're all freebies. I print them out, put them on that foam board, and then I layer them. So they're everything. You're trying to show the illusion of depth. This scene is only 24 inches in depth, and but it pulls off like you're looking at a city scene. There's little knickknacks, those iron or those steel tubes to the left of the fella up front. That's a straw from a soda, from a Burger King. I once heard somebody say that, the fencing looks fantastic. It's one of the easiest details you can add to a scene that really makes it jump, and little details like dogs barking or looking, carrying on, and it just adds to the scene. It's building a scene, I call it. Yeah.
What do you do to your automobiles?
I just weather them. Those are not exactly O scale. They're slightly off. I think they're Matchbox. They're
Okay.
slightly larger, but you get away with it. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Well, listen, let's take a break here a minute from looking at your photos and introduce and bring on the screen three of your friends to try to have them share with us some information about who Tom Farrell is. So first, I'd like to introduce Judy. Al, welcome. Really do appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening.
My pleasure, Joe.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you met Tom?
Well, actually, Tom and I's stories sound a lot alike. I too am from the Pittsburgh area, grew up there. And my railroad interest started because I lived in a town with the Baltimore and Ohio and the Western Maryland both ran through town. My elementary school was between the two tracks. So if you watched out one side, you could watch the B&O, and out the other, you could watch the Western Maryland. So it wasn't long, my father understood my interest, and he got me a train set, and he got me a Marx 3-rail tin plate train set. Well, I wasn't happy with this at all because this isn't what trains look like. So at about 6 years old, I got my first scale train, and my interest was so intense that he took me to visit a lady he worked with. Brother had a monster layout in the second floor of a 3-car garage. And as soon as I walked in and saw these double-headed mallet locomotives pulling 100 hoppers, they had me. I was a model railroader for life at that point. So I've been doing this for about 60 years. Modeled in HO for the first probably 35 to 40 years, and then walked into a hobby shop one day and picked up a piece of ON30 and just immediately fell in love with the size and the weight. And since it ran on HO track and I had tons of it, it was easy for me to make the switch. So I've been modeling in ON30 for about 25 years now. This is an example. This I built for the National Narrow Gauge Convention in Hickory, North Carolina last year. It was about a 3-foot diorama called the Deadline. And it was, I went through my scrap box and built up a bunch of derelict locomotives and scratch built the shop and threw this together. And it now resides in Atlanta, Georgia.
I'll be darned. That's beautiful work.
Thank you.
Really
Thank
is.
you. Something different.
Yes, it is.
But at one point I owned a hobby shop for about 10 years, which gave me a very diverse background in model railroading. It was actually a train shop. We didn't sell anything but trains. And so I have a very diverse background. I like the building and the painting and weathering and photography and everything, but I'm not a fan of electronics. So I'm still a DC guy using a transformer. But I met Tom. I host a train show in Harrisburg. That was another one of my scratch built buildings. I get accused when I post that picture of it being a real building. I tell them, look at the figure, you can tell it's not real. But I run admin a lot of the Facebook groups for model railroading, and I originally met Tom on the Facebook groups. Was a fan of his work, and we started talking back and forth. And then I guess 2 years ago, Tom made the trip to Pennsylvania for one of my O-scale narrow gauge shows that I put on here, and got to meet him in person. So and now we talk all the time, but we hit it off because we have very similar skills and likes, and even like he said, the way we photograph things is similar. So we're two brothers from a different mother.
Frequently I'll call Al up and use him for reference. A little later you'll see a hobo scene that has an abandoned rail car, and Al was one of the guys. I said, hey, what do they make these what's the width and of a rail car board? Are they 2x6s, 2x8s, 1x8? I just called them up. Or I had a locomotive that was literally hopping. It was going down the track and hopping. I said, what's going on here? And he says, it's this gear, it's fractured. I mean, so Al and Tim Malena are my go-to guys.
Well, being that I do this every day, all day, I get to see most of those problems and have an answer for them. So
I mean, he literally knew exactly what the problem was with the locomotive. He's the locomotive guru as far as I'm concerned. I may be the scratch building king, but he's the locomotive wizard.
This is a module that I just recently built called Tri-State. It's 32 inches tall and 42 inches long, all scratch built, used DPM sections for the one side, the other side is scratch built. But it's a very impressive, for a small module, there's a lot going on. It's fiber optic lit, and individual lights to the windows. So when you light it up, only certain windows light up and different intensities, like the lights would be in different places within the building. But I'm pretty proud of this one. It came out very well.
I think you should be. You should be awfully proud of it.
Very nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Well, let me introduce a second friend, Dan Rasad. Dan, welcome. I appreciate you taking the time to join us this evening. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and how you met Tom?
Sure. I've been modeling probably about as long as Tom has. Started out when I was probably 6 or 7. I think I really started with in model cars. My very first model kit was a 1965 Corvette, and I might say it didn't look too much like a 65 Corvette when I got done with it, based upon the level of glue and paint that ended up on it. But that was the start. And I like most of us, we either got a Marx train or a Lionel train to start out with, and I got a Lionel train. And I think Al and I must have been from the same bent, because I kept looking at it going, why does this have a third rail? And so I saved up my money. Oddly enough, 7-Eleven had this promo going on that it's like proof of purchase seals from Slurpees, and $20 and you could get an HO train set. And so it was an AHM cheap HO train set, but that was what started it all. And I've been an HO modeler most of my life, and it was probably 15 years ago that I got bit by the ON30 bug. And really what was the impetus for that was Bachmann releasing their 2-truck Shay. I had always loved Shay locomotives and the geared locomotives, the Climax and all of that kind of thing. And narrow gauge modeling, had followed that in various magazines and things like that, long before we had internet and Facebook pages and fun things like that. And just really wanted to have a railroad that had those kind of locomotives. And of course in HO, you either had to go brass or you had to go, with one of the kits to kind of create a Shay. So like Tom, I'm a frustrated artist. I always wanted to be an architect. In fact, I was heading that direction in terms of a career. And so for me, it was all about the buildings. And like Tom, I was a good period of my life in the Navy and moving all around and in apartments and barracks and things like that. And certainly no place for a model railroad. So what I did was I worked on kits and kind of built my skills doing that. These are some examples of just wall sections and some of the detail work that I enjoy doing. One of the things I love about Al and Tom's modeling is their ability to create atmosphere, right, in their models. It isn't just weathering. When you look at that scene, for example, behind Tom in that picture, you're seeing atmosphere. You're seeing almost weather that isn't present, but yet it's hinted at through the modeling. And I think really, really great modelers can do that kind of thing, and both of these guys really have inspired me a lot as I'm embarking on my next model railroad, to really put some focus in on some of those things, and start to do. I've done some scratch building in the past and just haven't had a lot of time to do it, but that's something I also want to get back into. So they're an inspiration in that regard. But I think when you see their modeling and you look at the level of weathering and detail and the composition of it, Howard Zane once said that model railroading is about 90% observation, about 10% perspiration. right? And what you see in these guys modeling is their observation skills. They are people who look at details out in the real world and try to capture them in their modeling. And I think that's what always all great modelers try to do. So it's been an inspiration to me. And, you know, I got connected up with Al on Facebook and came to his show 2 years ago. And that's also how I met Tom, was through Al on Facebook. And then I got this year, we came to the show, and lo and behold, Al put us in the same room. You know, so we had a scratch builder and a kit builder, you know, doing clinics in the same room, and we just had a blast and hit it off, and, you know, started sharing tips and tricks. And, you know, he's sitting over there scratch building a station kit, and I'm working on a couple different kits at the same time. And I look over there and he's got some Elmer's glue, and he's kind of having some challenges with, you know, how long it takes the Elmer's to dry. And I said, well, here, why don't you try some of this craft glue? I said, because that stuff works like, you know, a charm. Because he says, I left the whole, you know, CA type glue, super glue behind because of just the toxic nature of it. And I said, I totally get it. So here, you know, have some of this. So I just gave him a bottle of glue.
And I still use it.
Yeah. So, you know, we just hit it off, found out we had similar backgrounds, you know, both in the Navy, and really had a great time. And I think it was one of those features of this last year's show that I think was a huge hit. I think 2 years ago, you had more of a typical clinic, you know, where it was an hour long, or 40 minutes long or whatever it was,
Right.
and somebody showed up in a room. This time we had makers spaces where there was all kinds of building and activity going on, everything from people printing 3D detailed parts and things like that, to laser cutting wall sections and all kinds of cool stuff. And I think it was a huge hit at this last show. It really was. So I will stay connected to these guys as long as I've got breath.
Well, thank you so much. And again, thank you so much for taking the time to
Sure.
join us this evening. Now, let me introduce a third person, Dan Wallachon. Dan, thank you so much for being here tonight. We really do appreciate that. Can you share a little bit about who you are and how you met Tom?
Well, I'll try to admit as much as I can about myself. But first of all, I want to say thank you for inviting me here, and I'm honored to be with such great modelers that this show puts on. I met Tom. Now let's go right to Tom online, probably in one of the groups, and then it was last year. I mean, I admired his work. His pictures were phenomenal. I said, this guy's great. Well, I drive part-time for a dealership up here, and I had to go down to Bloomington, Indiana, and I put it on my Facebook page, and I'm driving down there. I got this note back from him and said, hey, stop by. Well, I was already on my way home, and I couldn't do that. But I said, we're gonna get together one time or another. And he went and tore down his railroad, tore down his house, or sold his house and built another one. And I haven't been down there yet, but I'm really planning on getting down there. Believe me, Tom. I want to sit there and play with you on this stuff. You know, it's very inspirational, very inspirational. I've got a lot out of you, and it's amazing what photographs and just talking with people does to people. But the big thing was last year, if you remember, in Harrisburg, Tom, you and I were, you were with John Weigel, and
Right.
you're talking to him, and he called me over to you guys and introduced me to you, and he said, what are we going to eat? And I said, well, let's go find out. We ended up at the Veterans Hall. Remember that?
Yes.
And everybody at the table was from a different state, and they didn't know what to do. They had no idea what to do. But that was a good night. That's how I really got into knowing you. And then I followed you in the last year and all your endeavors and everything else. And I feel close to you, although I've only spent a couple hours with you at the time. But your artistic talents are just phenomenal.
Thank you.
Phenomenal. And I have to say that. Well, I started out as a kid. Everybody did it. But when my brother and I couldn't share our Lionel trains, my dad bought me an HO set when I was 10 years old. And It was a Revell, really high detail. I couldn't believe it had springs in the trucks.
Yeah.
Wow, this is really compared to Lionel and 2 rails, and it's small enough to look at. Well, it was an Omaha 060 switcher. I don't know if anybody remembers the Union Pacific little saddle tank, but it had a chuff in it. It had a cam on the front driver, and it had this little box that had springs on both sides, and you shake it up with some oil in it. So it had that chuff sound. I thought that was cool. And not only that, it had the smoke box. Well, that lasted for a while. Then, like we all know, you get your license and women start coming into your life. And then the Army came into my life, and I went and came back. It's just time to settle down. And I got a job at a few years later at AMT. We used to do model car kits, truck kits, and everything else like that. And I got the job when I went to apply for it. A couple of pictures fell out of my folder. I didn't want to show them because it was a train picture, a little diorama I did, 12 by 12. You build models? Well, yeah, I've been doing it since I guess I was 7 years old. And okay, I was a can you start yesterday type of thing. So I'm there. I ended up being a project research analyst, which I had to go out and find stuff, materials to create a kit. And then I got thrown into the non-automotive section, but threw me into a whole different world of fire apparatus, researching it. I get go out to the bookstores and get all the books on fire apparatus. Come back. Well, what do you want to do with these things? Well, read them, huh? And that's what I had to do to research. And it was, I tell you, you learn things that you never thought you'd ever see when looking at one other thing. You find stuff on the side of the road, so to speak. Well, I got out. I started looking at. Well, that ended in 10 years I worked there. Got into job shop automotive, but I always got into this the passion of model railroading. And I met a guy, oh mercy, I met a guy at work who was a vice president of Detroit Model Railroad Club in O-Scale. Well, I already had ON2 stuff. I was buying some custom brass, and I wanted to get into main 2-footers. I just got turned on to that. Well, joining the club, he got me to join the club because I painted figures and I did scenery and all. And I had to go over and get something to run standard gauge because I had to do something. Narrow gauge was yet to be done. Well, we got into doing that. And then ON30 came by. And I was going to convert stuff from ON30 to ON3 so we could run it. And I tried, but then the ON30 got me. This picture here now, this is a 40 that I had over at this railroad that we were building eventually. And it dropped from the table, from the railroad down to the floor, and the Ford truck, rear truck broke, and it broke at the little sliding mechanism in there, and there was no way I could get it out. So I figured, okay, chop the front, take the front wheel off of the pilot off of it, chop the back, do a Banta cab, the curly roof cab like the 40s had in Maine, and shorten a little tender there. And put the pilot truck coming out underneath it, basically screwed to the top of the ash pan cover. And there we got it. I mean, it's a neat little engine that, I changed the dome too. That's under from Shapeways. But this is one of the first ones I scratch built. And I'm not too much into scratch building as I'm much into the scenery. And if you look around these photographs, you will see that it's a little bit more than just what would they call the plywood central. Now, this one here is one of the latest ones I actually took a picture of. Same engine coming around a curve. I saw my modules. Now the backdrop there is one that I painted the first time I ever thought of doing something like this on a 2 by 4 foot, 100,000 styrene, and I wrapped it around the outside because it was basically an island module. And the scenes. I mean, I'm from the Midwest. I'm from Michigan, and this is what I see. And I like the fact of having a common carrier going through green. That's what I see. That's what I see around me. And there's other things I've done, but I'll tell you, your fixtures though, Tom, very inspirational. I'm really glad I got around to seeing them, and even happier that I got around to meeting you. And hopefully we get along in the future. We see more of each other.
Well, you're welcome. Go ahead.
Well, you really do some beautiful modeling, Dan. And again, thanks so much for joining us this evening.
My pleasure.
All three of you guys, you talk about Tom and how you met him and so forth. You got to have some great stories to tell about him. So, do you have one that you really think really shows a little bit about Tom's personality and who he is? Al, how about you?
Yeah, I have a story that has nothing to do with his modeling skills. But last year, when Tom was at the show, he was lucky enough to buy a winning ticket for one of the door prizes. Now, the door prizes had been donated, so I had no idea what they were. So Tom wins a set of coffee mugs. So we're taking pictures of all the winners, and he pulls them out of the box, and the look in his face was priceless because they were used and they hadn't been washed. Whoever donated them, they still had coffee stains in them. I think there was a dead bug in the one. Of course, Tom entertained us with his comedic goings on about these mugs. And every time I think of Tom,
Think of the dirty.
it's the first thing I think of is the dirty coffee mugs. So it was really getting to see Tom for who he was. So we enjoyed it.
It was funny. Yeah.
Dan or so, how about you? You're muted.
The time of for me is about spending the time with him in the room in the maker space, and just just enjoying kind of the banter back and forth, and also just talking about various people coming in, questions they asked, and things like that. I mean, it was a lot of fun. And then I think to some degree, one of the things we're going to plan to do next time when we come to Al's show is we're going to coordinate a little bit better, because he found out that I'm a bit of a foodie, as one might see by my girth. But we aren't we all? And he was amazed to find out that I went to a different diner, because Texans don't know what a diner is, right? So when I was there, I thought, all right, I'm going to go have some real breakfast. And so I literally hit a different diner in the Harrisburg area every morning that I was there. And he was like, man, I wish I'd known about that,
Plus, you went to real dinners too.
Yeah, oh yeah, that was the other thing I found. I was going down into Maryland and hitting some, seafood places and things like that. And he's like, okay, we got to coordinate better on that next time. So,
Dan Walshot, how about you?
Well, I've only known in person. I've only time for a short time, so I really can't really get into any really funny story. But he conveyed a story to me that went back to when his childhood, and I don't know if it's really it should be told now, but it really got me to know him as a man, as a person, and as that's the best I can say, because that shows a lot. I wish I could say something really hilarious outside the fact that when we looked at the waitress and said, well, no, none of us are from this state. Then we tried to look for ID cards, and so, but at any rate, I tend to want to spend a lot more time with him going down to Bloomington and getting. It's only 5 hours away. It's not bad. It's not a bad job. I'll stay overnight somewhere in the car.
And you stay here at the house.
I can stay there. Well, thank you, sir. I'd be more than happy to help you do something on that, Tom. And just because I just respect what you do, and the story's going to come on later on. But right now, the story I'm talking about, I'm sure. And and I just figure it's personal, so we'll just leave it that way. But yeah, I can't wait to get involved with you. Run down there. Hey, I can do it anytime. Right. So let me know.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Well, Tom, I know that you're very supportive of O Scale. What is there about the scale that brought you to it?
Well, it comes back to the scratch building, really. When I was in N scale, one thing that I never really liked about N scale is, if you look at somebody's N scale layout, it's made up of kits. And there's nothing really wrong with kits, but everybody has the same buildings and the same structures, and you see the Walthers coal mine, you see the, all these things are so common, and so there's no uniqueness about a lot of end scale layouts. Nothing. I mean, they're all about getting as much railroad in a small space. I get that because I was in end scale since nearly its founding. It was founded back in 1962, and I got in it in 67. So all the way till 76, I was an end scaler. But the thing I never liked about it was this commonality of kits, and everybody had the same buildings. You could go to a layout and point it out. What I liked about O scale and even HO scale is that you have the opportunity to do something unique, and that's scratch build. This, for example, is a covered bridge that I did. That was an exercise in how much wood I could consume. This thing consumed so much wood, you'd think it was a fire. There's so many sticks on this. Those are individual boards with individual nail holes on them. Those are individual shakes. There's over 8,500 of them hand placed with super glue, one at a time. You can't possibly do this in end scale, and maybe not even an HO. I mean, this is not any particular prototype. What I did is I looked at covered bridges throughout New England, and I took the best features from every bridge that I liked, and I incorporated them into my model. So for example, the windows, the side windows give you an extra view of the interior, the bracing you can see along the roof line, this little, how the siding juts out there so the water sheens off. This was a combination of 4 or 5 bridges. There is no kit anything close to something like this. And it's so unique. This was what I would consider the centerpiece of the old rustic buff and old Gothic railroad. It's just, the uniqueness of scratch building is a turn on for me.
What was your, how did you make the shakes? What material did you use?
I just took a chopper and I took some scale lumber. I think those were 1x6s. They're shakes. They're not shingles. And I just chopped them away. They're about 1/4 inch in length. And I chopped one, put a little dab of glue on it and a tweezer and put it in place. I have all that. I mean, again, my wife thinks I'm insane. You do an hour or two an evening doing that, and then before you know it, it's done. It's just persistence.
Yeah. You have any suggestions about how O scale should be promoted to encourage more modelers to consider the scale?
Well, I think you got the biggest promoter online here, Judy. I refer to him as the John Allen of O scale. These shows, for example, are I think great benefit. Him running that Facebook page is how I met Dan and you, Jim. Between the modern Facebook page, I always post, even though I have my own Facebook page for the rustic buff and old Gothic, I always post on Al's first and share to my site. I mean, I actively give him the first shot, everything I do, because I think it's so important to promote the hobby through example. Yeah. I think if people see what you can do with O scale and ON30, that will draw more people into the hobby. And so I think the running that Facebook page and keeping it on topic, and then these little mini shows, I think if we could do some more regional shows. I know Al's in Harrisburg, but if we could get people across the country, to do them, I think that would really, it's great to meet these guys in person. I saw Dan and Dan's work on Facebook, but it was an entirely different thing to sit down for hours and hours with Dan Rousseau, in that room, and we bantered back and forth. I mean, there's no substitute for one-on-one conversations. I'll turn over to Al and Dan.
Yeah, I think, it is critically important. And I think the other thing about it is we see sort of a trend in the hobby that's happened over probably the last 20 to 25 years where, I think to Tom's point, kits can be nice things and that kind of stuff, but I think we've seen a push more towards, the shake the box, right? And everything is all out of the box, ready to run, ready to put on your layout, those kinds of things. And one of the things that always intrigued me about, the Narrow Gauge Gazette was, when you compare that to standard modeling magazines and you see the level of modeling and the quality of modeling, that's what I wanted to try to attain, right? That's what I aspired to be in my modeling. And I think that's what you see on Al Judy's layout, what you see on Tom's layout, that's what you see on the Facebook pages. That's what you see when you come to Al's show and you see, so many great modelers and the work that they do on display. I think that's hopefully an inspiration to people to, take a step beyond where they are in their modeling. Don't be afraid. I mean, my whole focus in doing a lot of the clinics I've been doing at various shows is, open the box, right? Just take the kit off the shelf and open the box and get started, right? And I think the next step is get the lumber, get the material, and start building something yourself, right? I mean, that's the scratch building. That's the embellishing what you do. That's the work that you see that these guys do. And I think that it's a progression. And what we're trying to help people understand is that it's not that hard a step, right? It's not that difficult to take that next step. And that's the difference. So it's about, what you see Al doing with the Facebook pages and the shows, he's simply evangelizing our hobby, right? To so many more modelers. And we already talked just before we kind of started the show that there were people in various different scales at this last show that came. Why? They wanted to see the modeling. They wanted to meet some of these people that were working on some of these great layouts and doing locomotive kit bashing or building locomotives from the ground up. All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, the ON, like the page for the ON30, it's the same thing. We have a lot of people that are not ON30 modelers, but they come to it to see the craftsman level of workmanship, the unique ideas, just the way things are put together, and that they don't see any other scales. Like you said, it's everything's right out of the box, and they like the uniqueness of it. They get ideas from it, which makes it easy to promote ON30.
What you all are saying is I firmly believe in. It's the reason I created New Tracks in the first place, because New Tracks is about modeling. Whether it's model railroading, whether it's model shipbuilding, whether it's model aircraft, whatever it is, it's amazing that the skills and the techniques are not that much difference. You may use different kind of glues, you may use different kind of paints. You may, if you're a military modeler, you may have different kinds of things that you're interested in. The dioramas are different, but the modeling, the confidence of being able to know that if you want to build something, you can build it, that to me transfers regardless of what scale you're in. Mm-hmm. I learned from an HO modeler. I prefer to model in O scale, but the HO guy taught me what I have in skills right now, and I never will forget him or wish that he was still around. But so I understand exactly what you're saying, and it's interesting to me that the ON30 and O scale modeler seems to be kind of leading the way in this transference of skills and techniques to other scales. And I really admire you guys for seeing that and for pushing that in your promotion of our hobby.
Yeah, I tell people just try. It's not that difficult. it's a hands-on thing. You can watch YouTube videos all day long until you get it in your hands and actually do it. Then you realize I can do this.
You know, when Dan and I were at Al's show several months ago, and I would encourage, people watch me put together this depot that it had no more than 2 minutes of thought. The night before I gathered up my supplies, as a confession, I just pulled some windows, some wood, just threw everything in a box, some paint, brushes. I mean, it literally took me 5 or 10 minutes to pack up the stuff I was going to do for my scratch build. And when I got to the show, I decided to build the depot. There were no plans, no preconceived idea. I just said, okay, we're going to make a depot this morning. And I just jumped right in on it, right? And when people would come in to see Dan and myself, I said, you really ought to, I said, do you build laser kits? And they said, yes. I said, then you can scratch build. There's really nothing to it.
Mm-hmm.
And a little later in the program here, you'll see a scratch build from plywood to finished model. And the biggest, Dan will back me up on this, the biggest constraint to people's scratch building was they claim they don't have the idea. They can't come up with the idea to do a depot or to do a coal tower and I just find that fascinating, because if you just, you don't have to start off with the Durango coal tower, which was the most difficult model I've ever made. We'll see that one a little later. You don't start off with, Picasso's artwork. I mean, you start off with a shed or something simple, and you move forward, and and then you just add complexity to it. We'll get into that a little later, but like Al and Dan just said, and Dan, you just got to start and do it. You just got to start.
It's definitely hands-on learning.
Quill to parchment, start writing.
Yep.
So.
Yep. I agree.
And don't be afraid, if something doesn't turn out exactly the way you thought it should initially, right? I mean, one of the things you see in Tom and Al's modeling, and Dan's as well, is you're seeing layers, right? Everything's built up in a layer,
yes.
Layering technique. And so if the first layer doesn't look great, don't worry about it. I mean, I think all of us have probably sat at our workbench at some point and totally screwed something up, and then realized, you know what? I kind of like the way that turned out, right? There's something about, the way I messed that up that works. And
we call that a new technique.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
You'll see later in the show.
Happy accident.
Later in the show, you'll see my coal tower. I started on that 6 years ago, and I built it to a certain point, and I screwed up the colors. I stained it and painted it, and I said, I screwed this up. I have this little bit of work into it, and I set it aside, and I didn't look at it for 6 years. I didn't touch this thing because I thought I ruined it. And I said, you know what? This past year, I was in a temporary apartment. I said, let me see if I can right the wrong here. And I turned it into the very best model I've ever made. So even if you make a mistake and you go back and revisit a model, it's the best thing I've ever done, So anyway.
Have any of you ever tried to build something and you thought, oh, geez, this is really going to be hard, but I'm going to try it anyway? And you went ahead and you tried it and you finished it and you looked at it and you said, I can't believe how great that turned out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And that covered bridge was an exercise in persistence.
I bet.
And the coal tower, as you'll see, was just, there are a lot of work goes into those.
Well, and if you've been a member of a club, and I have, you always have lots of opinions to, I won't necessarily say they're all encouraging, but you have lots of opinions about how you should do something, or you can't do it that way, or those kinds of things. And I think that's the other aspect of this, is the perseverance that Tom's talking about is, forging ahead. I'll never forget this. I was in a club in Maryland, and I wanted to build a macadam road beside the engine terminal. And, I hated the way any of the material that was used for roads at that particular time looked, because it just didn't look realistic. And I had a whole bunch of scale coal, and they're like, there's no way you can do that. Well, don't tell me I can't do something, because that's going to be the impetus to go figure out how to do it. Right. And I think that's the other element of all the great modelers have, is that they're the ones that you can tell them they can't do something. All that does is fuel them to go do it.
Well, if you remember when we started out, most of the stuff wasn't available commercially. We had to figure out. You made all your own stuff. You tried this, tried that, until you found something that worked, because 90% of the companies that are out there today didn't exist back in the 70s.
No, they didn't.
Right.
Well, listen, all of these kits that are available today, I mean, my gosh, they're just, you can find a kit for almost anything. Why scratch build? Why did you decide scratch building was the way to go?
Well, we touched on this a little bit before. The uniqueness of the scratch building is the primary driver. And, there is a cost. I mean, it costs you a lot less to scratch build than to buy one of these high-end kits.
Yep.
And just to be frank, I'm not too concerned with it's not a cost benefit to me. I'm just a scratch builder, but to someone who is reluctant to shell out $200 or $300, which is a sizable amount for a high-end kit, you can make one of these kits for $30, $40. There's nothing. That's a little shanty there that was scratch built, and
if you would, Jim, go back one slide. So just look at this scene that Tom has created. Okay. The other thing about scratch building, in addition to the satisfaction it brings, is, and the fact that you can do it with all kinds of different materials, whatever you have on hand, all of those kinds of things, you have the ability to put something together that fits your layout. A lot of times kits, you're trying to modify the kit or modify the layout to fit the kit. Whereas scratch building gives you the opportunity. The other reason to scratch build is you get the opportunity to fit whatever it is to the space that you have.
That's exactly right. You can't see it in this photo. A little on the black and white is a brewery to the right, and it fits precisely in that spot, and
you'd never find a kit for that.
No. And something Jim talked about earlier, well, go back to that photo if you would, if he doesn't mind. Go into that photo again. There you go. Yeah. Just leave it on there a moment. See the Pico track to the left? Those are all hand painted rail heads, the rails, the ties. The ballast is all dyed with acrylic or with alcohol washes. It's a whole weathering deal. That variation of color is critical to pull off a scene like in the left. If you notice the foreground, all the grasses, there's different materials there. There's different colors. The ballast goes from gray to buff. There's so much variation in color here. And when you look at people that are new to the hobby, or I don't want to sound like an elitist, not an artistic, they use a single color. Right. And you don't get the realism unless you have variation of color. And you don't do this in one shot. That scene on the left, I did that scene 3 different times till I finally got this look to it. And then I didn't do it in one evening. This was like, okay, we'll add some old rail ties. We'll add a pathway that runs from the shanty across to the brewery. You just keep building. Remember I said in the very beginning, layering and building a scene. It's not a one-shot deal. You just keep layering and adding color, components, people, blah, blah, blah. And before you know it, you've got something that looks like that, you know.
You know, I admire so much scratch building that all of you do, but so many modelers are just scared to death of scratch building. You mention scratch building to them, and their mind turns off, and their eyes glaze over, and that conversation stops. How can you encourage modelers to at least try the scratch building? How do you convey the benefits of scratch building and to try to encourage more modelers to do it?
You know, I just think it's such a very simple process with simple tools. I only use really three tools. I use a square, a special modeler square that I got from Micromark. I use an X-Acto knife and a ruler. That's all I use. I mean, I probably have more tools, like all these guys. We have drawers full of tools. I don't use them that much. Occasionally, I'll use my little Micromark saw or sander, but for the most part, it's just simple tools, and it's a simple process. We have a series of slides coming up. Yeah, here we go. So all my models start on a piece of plywood, aircraft grade, model aircraft grade plywood on the left there. I always start with plywood because it really paid off. I had 15 years in the making of the rustic buff and old Gothic railroad. It took me one day to take it out, because within an hour I had all the structures removed, because they simply were all built on this aircraft grade plywood. So I start my models with, okay, the size of the model is based on the size of the piece of the plywood. That's how I start. And then I say, okay, I want to make a depot with some sort of deck on it. So I sketch that out on that's the foundation, if you will. And then I take the wood in the upper right, I just, with a ruler and a square, I just put where my windows are. I use Tichy as my favorite now, because they come with pre-cut window panes, where the Grant line, you have to cut your own plastic. So I'm favoring Tichy these days. And I just measure the openings. They give you online, they'll give you the actual measurements if you want, but I just measure the window and I make the drawing. And then the next drawing below is the cutout. Anybody with a ruler and a square can cut windows and doors out of a piece of scale lumber. So we go to next slide.
And the Tichy is a good one to start with, because they're much more forgiving than the Grant line.
Yes.
So here is the structure coming together. Now I tend to brace my structures, because I want them to last 10,000 years. So everything has 1/4 inch bracing. And I have no fear of dropping a structure or having somebody pick one up or squeeze it accidentally. They're very strong. I do that because I don't want any warpage. It's just the way I do it. It costs you virtually nothing to do it, so you might as well brace the living hell out of it, you know. I always paint a black border and a gray center. It's just one of my things. I don't know why I do it. I just do it. And you'll see there's variation of material. I talked about that earlier. See, the main structure on the left has horizontal, and the one on the right has vertical. Just for variation, that's all. And you don't even have to be that precise. You see the corners are relatively sloppy, because we're going to put trim around it. So you don't even have to be, you know, tight on. Go to the next slide. Now I always say most of my models start with just an ugly base color, because I know as a quote artist, this is my base color. So this obnoxious yellow, I know, is only temporary. It's my base color. And I paint everything black on the inside with acrylic paint, because I don't normally, in fact, I've never did an interior detail. So if you paint with just an inexpensive acrylic black paint, which I got from Jensen, he's the one that turned me on to these acrylic craft paints. that's all I use now, are acrylic craft paints. They're inexpensive and there's every color in the universe. So this is the base color. We'll call it obnoxious yellow. We'll go to the next one. Now here's the weathering. Let's see what a dramatic change that scratching with a wire brush, highlighting with black alcohol washes and white acrylic paint, dry brush. It's a very simple technique. I take that obnoxious yellow, I scratch it with a wire brush, then I hit it with a black alcohol wash, and then I hit it with highlights of white dry brush with a white, and this is the technique. It looks to me, it looks like $1 million. There's really nothing to it. It's just patience, you know. And then the next slide with the trim covers up all your sins, you know, those corners dress right up. And see the joisting across the right, across the ceiling. Those are just little pieces cut on an angle and super glued up there in place. Although thanks to Dan Rousseau, I don't use super glue anymore. But this is all super glued together. And see the roof on the left picture, that's actually balsa wood. I have a couple sheets of balsa wood I'm just trying to use up because I don't like balsa wood. I use basswood, but that's a technique learned from making model airplanes as a kid, basically. That's how you make the fuselage of a model airplane, just little bracing like that. See the brick paper on the right photograph below? All I did is I found a Google somewhere of some bricks and I printed it out on PowerPoint and rubber cemented it on there. It's very effective. Costs virtually nothing. Again, cost isn't the driver. Uniqueness is the driver for me. Okay.
Tom,
Again,
if I may, you said about different techniques and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I noticed you weather your building after it's put together. I build all my walls completely, weather them, and the very last thing I do is assemble the 4 walls. So there's different techniques and different ways to go about it to get the same results.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you find what works best for you.
Yeah.
There's all different ways to do it. I always paint them as they get, as I'm building them up.
Yeah.
I don't paint them on the bench, the walls, but you could do it either way, really. It makes for a nice little depot. These are cedar shakes, and that's a Grant Line smokestack, and just some little details that are put on there, and just makes this just a clever little building that it costs virtually nothing, just time, you know, and it's unique. There is no kit like this. There isn't such a thing.
Yeah.
Is basswood your favorite material to build with?
Yeah, I have not mastered styrene. I just saw a post, I think on Al's website, somebody, or somewhere, maybe it was somewhere else, somebody built a caboose with styrene and successfully made it into wood. I cannot seem to do that. I cannot get styrene to look like wood no matter what I do. So I just prefer to work with wood. I mean, I like basswood, and occasionally I have a good selection of styrene. I'll do a styrene roof. That depot we showed in the very beginning is a quote metal roof, but it's styrene, you know. But I won't use styrene as wood. I just can't seem to pull that off.
Nothing looks more like wood than wood.
That's my theory. Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned in the past paints you use and glues you use. The crafts paint that you use, what are these? Just the cheapest you can find?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I used to use Tamaya and these special acrylics that come in Vallejo, and of course I have one of the world's largest collections of Floatwool. Well, Maccomer, I guess, has the biggest, but I have probably 50 bottles of that poison. You know, it has toluene in it, and I use the Jensen models. He's the one that turned me on from watching his work to use these acrylics. They're so cheap. They practically give them away. They're like $1, $2 max a bottle. They have literally 100 different colors, and they work brilliantly. There's no reason.
And every brand makes a different shade of the same color. So as you get down the road, you can get 6 different rusts, 6 different pale blues.
Yeah. And they're
59 cents, 79 cents.
And
then I have a coupon for them.
Then you go into Hobby Lobby and you get a discount. It's like, why don't you just give them to me?
That's right.
And I'll rarely use my Flocal. If I want to use old silver, or brass or some weird metallic, I'll pull out the Flocal. But for me, it's full speed ahead. And I had right before the show, Al's show, I had a severe reaction to super glue. I had to make a long story short, in January, when I was in California for a month getting cancer treatment, I built a model in my hotel room, and there was not great circulation. And I got overexposed to ACC, the super glue, and it clogged my inner ear. And nobody could figure out, all these specialists could not figure. I finally figured out it was overexposure to super glue. And it took me 2 or 3 months to my ears to clear. And then when I went to Al's show, I'm playing around with, I'm not going to use ACC anymore. And Dan suggested this high tack white glue, and that's what I've been using.
What's it called?
There it is. Tacky glue.
Tacky glue. It's it's used by crafters. They use it for all kinds of stuff. And this is what I put structures together. This is what you glue anything I basically need to glue.
He gave me a bottle of it.
and it sets up, it's not as fast as taking CA and hitting it with the zap kicker and that kind of thing, which is like arc welding.
Yeah, exactly.
But it has a sort of an elasticity to it, or a strength to it. So you can take 2 wall sections and use that tacky glue. And if you do like Tom does and put a piece of bracing material in it, that stuff will stand on its own. As long as you've got it square, you're done.
You don't have to fool around with it. I was using it at the show, and I didn't even have to have clamps or braces. It just holds it up. And the thing about super glue, all my models that you've ever seen on Al's page are all been super glued together. The only one that isn't is the one I did at his recent show. And there's no, if you squeeze it, it's strong. That tacky glue is just as strong. And you get a little bit of working time too. Super glue, like he says, it's like arc welding. You get one shot at it. I've had a few times where I had to cut things apart.
Yeah, the other thing about using the materials that Tom is using too is you got to think about the fact that styrene is fine, but it doesn't absorb things. Right. So if you're using the woods, the basswood and the shake and all of that kind of stuff, and even if you've got some hydrocal walls sections, or you're casting your own retaining walls or things like that. The great thing about those materials is all of this layering these guys are talking about, it absorbs that. And so it gives that, if you see a stone wall, you're seeing depth. Like if that just that piece of wall section that had the brick and the stone that was in my photographs, that was hydrocal. It was cast, and it basically picked up all of that layering that went on it, and it looked like old weathered brick, old beat stone.
That's the thing about the wood; it's porous.
Yeah.
So when you scratch it, it'll take an alcohol wash well. The
styrene, all you can do is paint it.
Yeah. This is an actual limestone it's scaled down from a prototypical photograph, as we'll see later on. But these are individual, again, an exercise in patience. This was board by board construction, this 3 sides of this, and individual pieces. The limestone scrap in front there is nothing more than pink foam. Now that came off well with the acrylic paint. That's several different colors, and I use a lot of washes too. Once I get the base colors on there, I'll start hitting it with washes. Sometimes I'll use, occasionally I'll use oil paints with distilled mineral spirits, odorless mineral spirits. That's not so frequent anymore. There's a lot of acrylic washes available. And if you just thin some of these acrylic paints with a thinner, you can accomplish the same thing.
What do you use as thinner, Tom?
For the acrylic paint?
Yeah.
To be honest, I use the Vallejo, comes a little, it doesn't thin with, I think you can thin with water, but I use a Vallejo thinner that's pretty expensive because you'd think they were selling liquid gold. But it seems to cut all these acrylic paints pretty well.
Okay.
This was one of the buildings I built in January when I was in California for treatment. I thought this came out particularly well as far as the weathering department's concerned. It looks old as hell.
Really?
I don't know how you get this with plastic. I don't even know why you would try, but this looks pretty authentic to me. It looks like a painting almost.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I like everything about how this came out. I just like remember early on I talked about variation in color.
Yeah.
Look at all the different colors that are going on here on that board and batten. And it's all a question of base coat, layers, and scratching, and acrylic and alcohol washes, and then highlighting with a dry brush in white. Get some highlights going on those shingles, for example.
Yeah, Jim, if you look at this photograph, one of the things you think about is this is like looking at old structures in the Northeast. And you could actually ask the question, how many layers of paint do you think are on those window frames, right? I mean, it's what he's created is that sense of, the old structure that's, nobody bothered to scrape it to paint it. They just put another layer on, every year or every 10 years or however many times they've painted it. It was just slap another layer on. And that's what you see here. It's
the other unique thing is what makes this model so this has exploded about, I'm guessing, 3 times normal size. If you can get a photograph of a model and have it hold up on a 3-time enlargement, you've painted it well.
No
Tom,
doubt.
let me ask you a question. I'm really interested in what you call washes.
Washes.
Yeah. Is this 3-to-1? Is it 10-to-1? I mean, what do you consider? How do you make your washes? I guess is my question.
Well, I would say there's 2 types of washes, 3 types that I use. The first is a simple alcohol wash. I used to buy it from Micromark already in a little bottle, but now I just take isopropyl and India ink and I mix my own. You got to make sure you get an alcohol compatible ink, and I probably mix it 4-to-1 roughly.
Okay.
4 parts alcohol, 1 part India ink. Then the second type of washes, which are very forgiving, and we touched on it, is the artist oil paints with odorless mineral spirits. I don't use that too much because even though it's odorless, it still stinks. But that's very forgiving. very forgiving wash is a mineral spirit wash, but it's very easy technique to use, says the alcohol. And the most difficult one for a wash are the acrylic paints, because they don't thin with water and they don't thin with alcohol. There's some magic elixir that they thin with. And so I don't normally, I'll dry brush with a thinned acrylic paint. I won't normally use a wash of acrylic paint. I'll use the alcohol washes. I have browns and grays. And at the show, Dan and I tried to see how many bottles of that special alcohol washes we could buy. What was the brand? I could go reach for one.
The Hunter line.
Yeah.
So I haven't used them yet, but those are the easiest to use. It's the ready-made alcohol washes, or make your own. And then the dry brush technique. And I should remember, I also use powdered chalks. I occasionally use those as well. You have to spray a fixative over them so they don't just brush off.
You can even use the acrylic paints. Like one of the things that, in fact, that structure in the picture behind me, when I like Al, I lay all my walls out and do them on the bench, right? Whatever I'm doing. And, you know, one of the things that's always been hard to do is mortar lines on brick. And not because it's that difficult, it's just finding the material, right? You know, you used to get the Roberts brick mortar stuff in the jar. That's hard to find anymore. So what I've found is I can take the acrylic paint, you pick a paint that looks like a good mortar color, right? And you just mix that with water until you get sort of a milky consistency to that. And then I lay that on the structure. I just brush it on the structure and let that stuff seep down into the mortar lines. And it might take a couple of times going over the structure. And once you've got the mortar the way you like it, then you just go back over it with the alcohol washes to dirty it up and muddy it up and that kind of stuff. So you can even use the acrylic paints to create your mortar on brick work or stone.
I use it straight out of the bottle.
Yeah.
I put it on, paint the entire, once it's painted brick red, paint the entire thing with thick white acrylic. You take a wet paper towel and wipe it off.
That's the other technique.
All the mortar lines stay, and then when you put the wash on it, it turns into a grayish color and looks just like mortar and bricks.
Yeah. So see, there's right there, you've got a couple different approaches to doing the same thing.
That's right.
And really what it's based on is trial and error. And each one of you try different things. They work for you, and you say, well, that's how you do it. I mean, why change?
And this is what I tell people, try them all, because what works for one guy might not work for you. You know, you find the one that you like the way it works or gives you the results you want, or you have the skill level to do it that way. And that's the one you go with.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm trying to get more and more, I'm trying to get away from the toxic, for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
The toxic paints and glues. I'm trying to use the acrylics and not the Floquil, as great as it is, the toluene is bad for you. The ACC, although it's not a carcinogen, it just stinks, and it can't possibly be good for you. So I'm trying to detoxify my model making.
Gotcha. How about tools? Tom, you talked about you use 3 or 4 basic tools. All of us, I've got no telling how many tools, different places.
I've got a huge tool collection, but for me,
I stopped counting, but I may use 5 or 6 basic tools. That's basically what I work with.
I use a ruler, a square, and an X-Acto knife and a pencil. That pretty much gets her done. I occasionally use my electric little sander or my little electric saw if I have a piece of plywood I have to cut. But for the most part, it's, maybe I'll use a razor saw once in a while, but you don't really need, I have all these fancy clamps and fancy this and fancy, it all sits in a drawer.
and order number 11 blades in 100 packs.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I find that's have a fresh blade is the key to the whole thing.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Tom, how long do you think that it takes you to build a model?
Well, of course, it depends on the model, but this one was this was an interesting exercise here. This is one of my nicer models, scratch built. This was an exercise in I didn't want a square wall. Every wall was going to have a bump out. That was the concept of this model. So every wall has a bump out to add interest, visual interest. You know, we talked about sculpture. This is a sculpture here, as much as it's a model. And because this one had so many bump outs and different materials, remember I talked about variation of materials. If you look at the front of this building, you'll see cedar shakes on the extreme back wall. Then you'll see lap siding on the first bump out. Then you'll see vertical siding on the next bump out. And then on the stairwell, you'll see yet another material. So this was an idea to use mixed materials with no wall that is flat. And because no wall was flat, it took a long time. This took a couple months to make.
You have 4 different kinds of roofing as well.
That's
Yeah,
right.
the roofing's all different. I have if you look at the side photo there, you see the, so
You got
corrugated, use the sheet metal roof. There's a tar paper roof in the front. So
and
this was
seam
all,
steel.
yeah, it's all different variation. This is all about variation in color, variation in materials, and bump outs. This is my bump out model.
The hilarious thing about this model is that it's Sanford and Son salvage and the building is salvage.
It is. It's all
You
a
know.
collection of junk. Yeah. And this one's one of my personal favorites. It just came out. I like it. And do you see the little yellow sign there? Forget the dog,
Yeah.
beware of the wife. My wife hasn't seen that one yet. This was a very, go ahead.
Tom, you build dioramas.
Mhm.
Why do you break it down into diorama building?
So I like to drop them in on the layout, is what I like to do. So I'll do as much as I can on the bench because it's easier to detail the structure on the bench than on the model or on the railroad. And then I integrate that plywood into the railroad. You cannot see that it's sitting on a piece of plywood. But when it's time to take up, should heaven forbid I have to take apart the next railroad, it'll come right out. This is one of my favorite photographs. As Dan likes this one too, Dan Walsh.
Yeah.
This, we talked about art for art's sake. This is all about not only the modeling, but the composition. I think Judy would agree that composition's critical in the presenting a photograph. And
Absolutely.
and this is all about composition and drawing your eye. Your eye, first thing you probably see is, well, I've looked at it so much. Someone tell me, what's the first thing you see when you look at this photograph?
I see the building.
The
Right.
fence.
The train?
The fence.
Yeah,
The
the
fence.
signs on the fence. That's what got me. Yeah.
You see how your eye, so you look at the fence, you look at the building, and then they're angled so it draws you to the tunnel, which now you see the train, right?
Yep.
And then you've got a photograph in the background of the Pennsylvania hills, and then you have super trees and a pine tree there. That hillside took just about as long as building that building. Those trees had to be individually, they're super trees, but they had to be spray painted. They're all different colors. Remember I talked about variation? There's at least 6 or 7 different spray cans of green on those individual trees, because the one thing I don't like is somebody will put in trees and they'll all be the same color.
Right.
And in nature, they're not.
Yeah.
So I individually spray 6 or 7 different colors, and then I add multiple flock to them so that there's variation. There's variation in nature and there's variation in and that's what makes it realistic. Is
What
there's
draws me into this scene is not only the composition and the great modeling, but it's the texture that you see. So, I mean, you see the board fence and the signs, and you see the stone structure behind with wood, and the roof. And then you see the brick structure behind that, different texture. Then you've got all the bracing of the tunnel portal and the hillside, and then the chains holding down the loads. I mean, there's just all kinds of different visual interest, visual texture in this scene that is what makes it so rich to look at. Even the locomotive, even the scenery, even the ballast and the waste and stuff like that that's built up along the rail line. I mean, it's all of those things. And this is the thing that, I think a lot of modelers, when they first are looking at something like this, they go, well, I could never do that. Well, it's not something that you pull out of a box and it's all done, right? It takes time. It takes process. It takes being willing to step out and do some of these things. And it's the difference between, if you're a traveler, I often have said about travelers, they come in two varieties, right? There's the destination people and they're journey people. And the destination people don't care how they get there. They just want to be at the destination. Get me to the beach, give me the cocktail in my hand, and I'll be fine. The journey people are interested. They have a destination in mind. I mean, when you look at this scene, Tom had a destination in mind. But for Tom, it was about the journey to get there. It's about all the little things that I can do and embellish and add and, augment along the way that gets this whole scene pulled together. And
exactly, well put. That is dead on. Here's McCoy's Camp. This is named after my college roommate. Some careers go up, some go down. This was a phone call I made to Al Judy to get the correct size of the boards. And the shed to the left, the theory is that the boards that these guys made their shed out of are from the abandoned rail car. Those are artista figures. And this was a little diorama that's, I don't know, a foot by, maybe not even a foot by 6 inches max. It's just, and it'll drop right in the new layout. This, the fire, I did a demonstration for Jim how I did that. That's just little scraps of wood painted black and then painted red, orange, and yellow, and that's cotton there, and it just pulls off a very effective fire. There's trash in the trash can, dogs chasing rabbits, and there's all kinds of things going on. The guy standing there, he's not pushing against anything. It's just everybody's, just in the. This was one of the most interesting, enjoyable little dioramas I ever made, because I've always wanted to do this. It was so easy to do too. The abandoned rail car was such a simple thing to make. Really, there really was nothing to that.
How do you take your individual dioramas and blend them into a believable model railroad?
Well, once I have the diorama, I drop it in and then I build the scene out around it. If we look at the picture behind me, which we just looked at, I started with the structure. Well, I started with the tunnel, actually. So I built that tunnel, and then I said, boy, it would be cool to have a wall next to it, that braced wall. I'd seen that somewhere. I always wanted to model one. So I built that wall. Then I put the mountain in behind the tunnel. Then I put in the structure. Then I said, I better have a fence here and a spur line. And I just kept, so I started with the tunnel. And the opening for the tunnel was nothing more than a National Model Railroad gauge. So I built the tunnel out around that. So that's the NMRA clearance gauge. That was the outline for that tunnel. And then it's a piece of plywood, aircraft plywood. And then I laid strips on it. And then those plastic, that's just styrene, the bracing and little Grant line nuts glued onto the styrene. So anyway, I built the tunnel, I built the retaining wall, then I placed the structure. Then I said, just layer after layer. I just said, okay, now we need a fence because I don't want people coming from the Lazaro Ironworks onto the rail tracks, so we better put in a fence. Then I thought how cool it would be to just hit it up with all kinds of tin signs. So I went online and brought those into PowerPoint, printed them out and glued them on there and rusted them up. And then I super detail my Pico track. I paint all the ties individually, the rail heads, and rust the rails. It's as Dan so eloquently put, it's a layering process. You just start with one component and keep adding it. So if it were a diorama like McCoy's hobo camp, I'll drop that in and then I'll start building out from it. It's the center of attention, the hobo camp. And I'll try not to do too many things that distract from the hobo camp. But it'll be next to the tracks on an abandoned line,
I got you. Okay. Well, listen, we've seen some of your modeling and so forth, but why don't we see some more of your photos of the different things that you've built?
Okay.
What are we seeing here?
So you're seeing the other side of my infamous depot. And this is called the Broadway Hotel, named after an Al Stewart song. This little freight yard, little city scene. You can see a hobo getting chased by a cop. You can see a couple engineers leaving their little shack, their little yard office. You see us. This is all scratch built, by the way, all of it. Again, it's a layering process. All those photographs on the left are, for the most part, just pulled off of the internet. A couple of them were purchased off of eBay, but they're all behind foam. And again, the detail, there's a cliche in the hobby, the details make the scene. Like Al did that abandoned locomotive diorama from his parts bin. A lot of this is from my parts bin, and it's just building the scene, and even the track, that ballast isn't simply put down. The ballast is put down and carefully washed with alcohol washes, browns and grays and blacks, and everything about this is just done in steps, one step after another after another. I thought it'd be cool to have an outhouse, so I built an outhouse one evening. I thought it'd be nice to have a loading platform, so I cast one out of plaster and weathered the crap out of it. I'll just work on a scene, I'll put some time into it, then I'll go work on another area, then I'll put some more time into it. I jump around a lot. I would say this is a finished scene though. This shows multiple things here. This is Sarunas lighting, named after a kindergarten friend of mine. If you have light, it's a miracle. It's an ode to one of my modelers that I admire. The sand tower in the back, that's all scratch built. That's a Walther's Walther's Cyclone in the main body of the sand tower. The spout, I drew it up and asked my brother to 3D print me a spout. So there's a whole bunch of components on that he printed for me, and then I assembled it, and that's how we have that sand spout. That's a DPM building. The Sarunas Miracle Lighting is that's a DPM building with a Foundation is from Chuch, or however you say it. The sign scratch built. Those are Grant Line lamps. And that whole right side is all scratch built. The crane, the overhead crane that runs back and forth, that's all scratch built. Just a nice little scene is all.
I think it's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, there you go. There's a nice close up. So
That looks real good.
It really does. That's just beautiful.
Yeah.
Sarunas Miracle Lighting Products. If you have light, it's a miracle. That's I always try to bust them off of my friends. This is a pickling vat that they take in about an entire day to make one of them. This model's not quite finished. I think I have 2 or 3 of these. I need to make about 6 pickle vats. They just take so much time. There's nothing more to that than that's plastic styrene, wrapping it, super glued onto the battens, and then I just weathered the crap out of everything, and I highlight it with. I wanted to show salt stains. That's why there's so much white, because when salt evaporates, you get a salt. So that was the concept there.
Yeah, the weathering's fantastic.
That's
Yes, it is.
That's Peter Piper's pickled peppers plant. So more drunks. This is on the that yard photo that we just saw. This is the right next to the Broadway Hotel. Guy playing the harmonica, guy drinking. Just, these fences are really add a lot of visual interest, and they're really easy to make. I just use scale lumber, 1x6s normally, 2x4s, and 4x4s. So the vertical posts are 4x4s. The side rails that hold the fencing on are 2x4s, or 2x6s, I think, 2x6s in this case, and then 1x6s on the verticals. And again, variation of color is the key. You don't want everything to be the same color. That's why it looks realistic, relatively. Yeah.
When you create your scenes, is this something that you've got written down on a piece of paper? Is it you use photographic pictures that you've taken of actual scenes, or is this something that's just in your mind?
Just comes right out of my head. One of the biggest compliments I ever got was that black and white photo on the right. I showed it to somebody, I forget where, and he honestly thought it was a historic photo of his hometown. I don't know if I'd go that far, because I can tell obviously that it's a model, but it was a nice compliment. I think it's kind of neat to do black and white versions of these. I think you get a real. What do you guys think? I just think it's cool.
I love them.
I know Al does it occasionally. He hasn't did it in a while, but he used to do a few of them.
Sepias are good too. Depending how what era you're into, the sepia colors.
Right.
They look pretty good.
This is some historic photos of mining Indiana limestone, the nation's building stone. This one to the left is a etching from the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s. The ones on the right are from the 20s and 30s. See those blocks? Those are all 10, 15, 20 tons a piece. Those are gantry cranes. I had the privilege, and it was a privilege for a almost 4-year period, to run the largest dimensional stone company in the world, the Indiana Limestone Company. And I spent a lot of my time running around these we had 7 big quarries, and I spent a lot of time running around looking at the old rail lines, because they used to move all this stone in and out of the quarries with rail cars. I just found it fascinating,
That's great. That is great. My gosh.
And this was my quarry.
Excellent.
This is all done with pink foam. Everything you see, there's pink foam with Sculptamold on it. The actual quarry blocks, I think I just painted the pink foam. I roughed up the foam and I painted it with acrylics. And again, variation in color. Like the amateur would just paint them gray or buff, one color. You start off with the one color and then you add layers. Everything's about layers and variation. I keep saying that because that's how you get it realistic, is variation in color.
Light to dark.
Yeah. And
And
the
you
one
can
on the-
see where the cutting took place on
Yeah,
those stones.
that's right. And this on the left is one of my favorite photographs because that's about as real as you can get. That's what it looks like in an Indiana limestone quarry.
Mhm.
That's what it looks like. You know, see the wood that's blocking the stone underneath the block.
Right.
They store these stones on, those are called ledges. You see the cut marks in the bottom left-hand side? Those are vertical. They start out by drilling hole. It's a splitting process, but if you've ever been to a limestone quarry, that's part of the deal, is those vertical cut marks there.
Well, that and the Wile Coyote powder.
Yeah, that's, I think we have a close-up of that coming up. One of my little jokes. Go ahead. Oh, so here's that prototype. What do they call it when you downsize a building? You selective
Selective comparison.
compression.
Selective comparison.
Yeah, so this was a loose selective compression of that building was the idea. And unfortunately, that roof on my structure is removable. And that is fully detailed inside on the bracing for the roof and the rafters and the walls. It's all prototypical. I mean, it is absolutely balls on. I should have taken a picture with it off, but I don't do,
Well, I'll tell you, your detailing is just unbelievable. How do you know when it's time to stop a diorama or a scene? How do you figure that's as good as I can do it? I'm going to move on to another project now.
I think you want to be careful you don't overwork a scene. But I think when it just looks right, you know, like the picture behind me again, there's nothing more I think I could do to add to that little scene to make it any better. Maybe if I visited it again in well, it doesn't exist anymore, but if I visited in 5 or 10 years, maybe I'd want to tear it out and do something different. But you build it to the point where you just get a comfort level that you've captured the moment. You have a feel for it. And I look at these things in terms of a sculpture or an artwork or a painting, you know, and if you don't want to overwork the Mona Lisa, you know, Da Vinci stopped at a certain point. I stop at a certain point. And I move on because there's so much to do. You know, you just keep trying to refine your railroad, you know. So I just keep moving on. Yeah.
What advice would you give to a new modeler?
I think Al and Dan touched on this. They said, don't be afraid to try anything. And you're not gonna do a scene like I have behind me on your first shot. You know, I've been doing this since I was 7 years old. You build on your skills. And you don't have to start when you're 7, you know, but you have to build on your skill level. If you want to do scratch building, the first start is to build laser kits. Get comfortable with how these things go together. And then try a simple structure and scratch build it. And then keep advancing your skills. You know, don't be afraid to. Coming up as my coal tower, it was a failure. I thought I ruined it. I didn't look at it for 6 or 7 years. And I said, you know what, I'm having another crack at this. So you can't be afraid of your failures because you can rework these models. So you might not like what you've come up with, but then rework it, come back to it after a period of time. That, here's Tom's best. This is the best thing I've ever made, in my opinion, humble opinion. This took a very, very long time, and it was quite challenging. This was not something that a novice would want to try for his first scratch build, I can tell you that. This is a very complex model. It doesn't look maybe complex, but it was. And I've did a lot of scratch building. This was really, really took some time.
That is just outstanding. I mean, it's just, I'm speechless. That is absolutely outstanding.
I am very proud of this structure. That's all I can say.
My God, you should be.
I stare and gawk at this thing all the time and can't believe I put it together. It is just, Tim Malena gave me some prototype drawings when I was about a third of the way through it. But it's pretty much based on the Durango coal tower. And it's got a plywood shell underneath the main structure. The ore bin, the coal bin, if you will, is plywood. And then I've hand layered strip put on there. And this was a structure that I miscolored and went back to, and I couldn't be more pleased with the coloring now.
So Jim, you asked a question early on in the show, why scratch build, right?
Yep.
And what we just heard Tom relay is how satisfied and proud he is of this structure, right? You really aren't going to achieve those kinds of things in your modeling without taking some risks, right? And you're also not going to achieve them if everything is been taken out of a box, right? There's satisfaction, and there's a lot of self-satisfaction one gains by creating something like this. This is why we create. It doesn't matter whether you're building ships, whether you're painting paintings, whether you're sculpting, sculptures. Pick the medium. The medium is irrelevant. It's the fact that the joy is in the doing. And we just heard that, right? This was a structure he started, he left it, he came back to it, and now it's one he's most proud of. You're not going to get that in a night, right? Or a day, or so one of the challenges to translating these things to a society that has become so focused on instant gratification is you're not going to get gratified instantly. So get over that, and get out the tools and get to work.
My biggest charge on these models is, quite honestly, when they're finished and I look at them 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 and I look at them. I mean, I just enjoy just looking at them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this took months to make. And, in my mind, it shows that it took months to make, and it's going to be another focal point of the layout. It's a 5-star structure for me.
I think one of the greatest thrills in modeling is to be able to build a model, and once you think that it's finished, to be able to sit back, relax, have a drink, look at that model, and say, I built that. Yeah. I think those words, I think that's the greatest thrill a modeler can have.
When I've had people visit my layout, I haven't had a lot because I'm off the beaten path, but you're all welcome. Anybody out there in YouTube land, just make contact. I'll be happy to show you. But it's such a sense of pride to say everything you're looking at, everything is scratch built. All the kits are on the shelf over there. Everything on the layout scratch built. It's just a nice feeling, you know. It's just
Well, listen, guys, we've been here for quite a while, and I've got to wrap this up.
yeah.
For the three friends, Al and Dan, you have any last comments you'd like to make about or to Tom?
I'll go first. I'll
Okay.
tell you what, it's very impressive. These 2 hours have been very impressive. A lot of good things have been said about how to do things. Everybody's got some input on it. And if you can't learn anything off of this video, at least be inspired to go out and do something. I don't know what to say. You know, it's very inspiring what Tom has done.
Thank you.
I think Tom is, his modeling is of the highest caliber. I love the unique and well thought out scenes that he creates, all unique, period correct. And that's very difficult to do, to build something the size of a layout and keep the consistency, to have that same look throughout. And you're very good at it. When I see a picture of his work, I know it's his work just by looking at it.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I mean, I look at Tom's work and, I mean, it's really this is sort of a trait of all really great modelers, right? I can look at Al's work and know it's Al. I can look at Tom's work and know it's Tom, right? I mean, Jason Jensen's been mentioned tonight. I mean, there's a number of people that in our hobby that you can look at their work. And why is that? Because it's no different than looking at paintings and you can tell who painted it, right? I mean, that artist, that sense of the artist comes through, and it shows the uniqueness. Al's layout is very different from Tom's, or the new one that Tom will be building. And they're both unique in their own right. It's the same with Dan. I mean, they're all different, and yet they all contribute to modeling in their own way, and they all show us the lens through which that particular modeler views the world. And it's getting back to the Zane's adage, it's 90% observation and 10% perspiration. What you see in these guys is people who have really excellent observation skills. They see the world around them and they can replicate the world around them. And that's really what a great modeler does. And it doesn't matter if they're military, if they're model railroaders, shipbuilders, it doesn't matter.
Jim asked earlier, how do you know when a scene is finished? It's because I already know what it's going to look like before I even started.
There you go.
Begin with the end in mind.
I'll already know what it's going to look like when it's done. Yep.
Yeah, that's true.
Got to envision it, and you got to go through it. That's it. Follow through.
Guys, thanks so much for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. You've given a lot of good advice and counsel, and anybody would be fortunate to be able to sit down and talk with any of the three of you, and hopefully have you as one of their mentors. So thank you, gentlemen, for being here with us.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
me.
Welcome. Thank you.
And Tom, since we're about to close this out, I'll give you the final word.
Well, thank you, Jim. I'm humbled to be featured in your program, and all the kind words that were put forth this evening by my three friends, and all the compliments. And I hope I've inspired modelers out there to try scratch building. There's a particular satisfaction, as we pontificated on, in finishing something that is unique, something that you've created from your mind, unlike anything out there. There's just a real high satisfaction in the creative process. It really is artwork. It really is sculpture. It really is a fine art. And thank you for letting me share my scratch building with everyone. And again, I'm humbled to be part of this, and very appreciative of the support.
Well, I'll tell you, it's been really my honor to be with you tonight, Tom. as well as your three friends. It's obvious to me that you've made such a contribution to our hobby and to modeling. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time this evening to share your thoughts and your opinions and your techniques with us. I mean, I really do appreciate it. And I feel the same way about your three friends. They've given an awful lot of themselves tonight. And I think it's been beneficial. As one of your friends says, if you can't learn anything from what you heard tonight, I don't know what else to do. I don't know how else to try to present it. So Tom, thank you so very much.
Thank you again. Yeah.
Well, that's it for our show tonight. I want to thank the viewers for sticking with us. It was a little longer show tonight than normal, but I think that it was worthwhile. And I certainly didn't want to stop it and cut it any shorter than I did. But I do appreciate so much the viewers staying with us. I hope that you enjoyed it. Most importantly, I hope you learned something. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, New Tracks Modeling, and ring the bell. You'll get notifications in advance of all of our future shows and know who the next guest is that you can meet on our shows. Also, we have a website, New Tracks Modeling. And if you'll subscribe to our website, newtracksmodeling.com, then you'll get the login links to our Zoom part of those shows. And you can join us live with either Zoom or YouTube on our Wednesday evening show at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We do those shows each Wednesday. The show that you've seen tonight, we do twice a month, every other week. And I hope that you'll be with us in 2 weeks for our next one. Thank you again for being here. And until next time, happy modeling.